This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can find options that fit your budget and potentially lower your bills. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
Hey, want a cookie? Oh, I know you just ate, so you're craving something a little sweet. Besides, one cookie isn't gonna kill you. How about half? Just a bite? Bite it. Bite it. Bite it.
Food noise isn't fair, but Mochi Health is. Your affordable GLP-1 source that puts you on a path to successful weight loss by quieting food noise.
Bite it.
Shh. Learn more at joinmochi.com. Mochi members have access to licensed physicians and nutritionists. Results may vary.
Criminology is a true crime podcast that may contain discussion about violent or disturbing topics. Listener discretion is advised.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 406 of the Criminology podcast. I'm Mike Ferguson.
And this is Mike Morford.
Mr. Morford, how you doing this week, man?
Doing good. Had a little bit of a challenge. Had to go out car shopping for my daughter's first car. She's going to be hitting the road, and that's a little bit frightening. So that's been taking up some time, but we found one, and she's ready to go. So that's what I've been up to. What have you been doing?
Okay, wait a minute now. This is, things that make you feel old. When I first met your family, actually, to hear that your daughter's getting ready to drive, it's hard to believe that much time has gone by, but it has. I mean, we've been doing this for 8-9 years.
Yeah, time flies, and it's strange because with my daughter, it seems like she's growing up so fast, and my son, who's going to be 10 soon, he seems like he's just going super slow. So I'm sort of stuck in two different worlds. It's kind of strange.
Well, let's go ahead and give our Patreon shout outs. We had great new support from Lulu. So we really appreciate that.
Thank you so much, Lulu. That really helps us out. And for anyone else that would like to support the show, please head over to patreon.com/criminology.
All right. Well, we're jumping right in. And this case is coming up on its 22nd anniversary, and it's a case that shocked a lot of people, and it made headlines with monikers like the Suitcase Murder, and the killer was dubbed the Suitcase Killer. We're talking about the 2004 murder of a man named William McGuire at the hands of his wife, Melanie McGuire.
Melanie Lynn Slate and William McGuire, known as Bill, married in 1999. By 2004, they had two young sons together. They were just 2 and 4 years old. Bill, a veteran of the United States Navy, worked as a computer programmer at New Jersey Institute of Technology, and Melanie was a nurse at a fertility clinic in Morristown. After 6:10 p.m. on April 28, 2004, Bill dropped out of contact with everyone he knew. It's pretty sudden and unlike him. The 39-year-old was usually very busy on the phone or working on his BlackBerry, but after 6:10 p.m., there was just nothing. It was a big day for him, too. That was the day that he and Melanie closed on their first home in Franklin Township. It was a nice house with a purchase price of nearly $500,000. The family would never get to move in together. Now, we don't know all the details, but despite Bill dropping from sight, it's not clear what level of concern people had about his absence, or if they tried to see where he was or ask questions.
The next day, on April 29th, Melanie consulted with divorce attorneys and then drove to the Middlesex County Courthouse, where she planned to file for a restraining order against Bill due to domestic violence. However, the courthouse was very busy that day, so she left. She didn't stay at their apartment or at the home they had just purchased. Instead, she checked into the Red Roof Inn in Edison, New Jersey. She went back to the courthouse the next day, on the 30th, and did successfully apply for a domestic violence restraining order. She said that things hadn't always been violent between them, but that Bill wasn't doing well in the stock market and had been losing a lot of money gambling.
Melanie claimed that she and Bill had once argued on the phone after he got a ticket while he was driving. He threatened to kill her when he got home. She drove away from home that night to avoid him, but ended up going back. She told ABC News Nightline, "I had left and I should have stayed gone. I wasn't strong enough to leave." We'll talk more about the argument that actually led to Melanie filing for a restraining order in just a bit. After Melanie filed that restraining order, Bill remained out of sight, but Melanie never reported him missing.
And more, if you know, in a lot of cases, we talk quite a bit about that point in time where someone goes missing and then people get worried. And then maybe that level of worry goes up. This is kind of a strange situation because, first of all, there's not a ton of details out there about what people did or didn't do, thought or didn't think after Bill went missing. But then you also have what was, according to Melanie, a very contentious relationship to the point where, she accused Bill of domestic violence.
Yeah, I think there are some things maybe going on behind the scenes of this marriage that people might not know about from the outside. If this gambling stuff is happening, domestic violence, definitely doesn't seem like a perfect marriage by any stretch. But then you have Bill dropping out of sight. And again, we don't have all the details about who was concerned and when, but I would hope that if I dropped out of sight, didn't show up to record an episode of Criminology for a while and just you couldn't reach me, I'd hope you would ask some questions or any of my other friends and try and figure out what happened to me.
Yeah, but to me, this is where the accusations of domestic violence really come in, because normally, we're talking about a wife, a husband, a significant other, some family member being very, very worried, right? For someone. Well, how worried are you going to be if you're in the midst of trying to get away from someone because they are assaulting you? And that's a real strange dynamic in a case.
And there could be a couple explanations for why Melanie didn't report him missing. Maybe, like you just said, she is trying to get away from him. She's worried about herself and putting distance between herself and not worried about what he's doing or where he's at. On the other hand, if she's done something to him, that could explain why she's not reporting him missing too.
The following month, on May 5th, a dark green suitcase was found floating in the water by a fisherman in Chesapeake Bay near Virginia Beach. This is about 300 miles from the McGuire home. When the suitcase was open, it revealed grisly contents: 2 severed lower legs, chopped off at the knees. Less than a week later, on May 11th, a student walking on nearby Fisherman's Island saw a dark green suitcase on the beach. His curiosity got the better of him, and he decided to open it. Inside the suitcase, there was a head and a torso, including the arms. 5 days later, on May 16th, a third dark green suitcase was found floating in the water by yet another fisherman. Inside were a male's pelvis and thighs. There was no doubt to investigators that all of these body parts belonging to a man were from the same person. They just needed to figure out who that person was, what happened to him, and who was responsible. The problem was they didn't have any men in that area who were missing. And so this kind of goes back to what we were just talking about, right? Bill is not reported missing. And normally you would say, well, that's very, very strange. But here it might not be, given the toxic nature of their relationship, at least as it's being told from Melanie. But I want to talk about these suitcases. First of all, if I start seeing on the news that suitcases are being found, in numbers with body parts, okay. I'm going to have to, batten down the hatches a little bit, because that's a scary thought. The other thing is, if you're walking along in a remote area. Maybe you're fishing, right? There's woods, there's water, whatever it is, and you stumble upon a suitcase. What is the likelihood that you can curb off that, that fascination to want to see what's inside of it? We talked about, this guy, his curiosity got the better of him. And I think that would happen for a lot of people. Hey, curiosity is a big deal.
Yeah, I think some people have a morbid curiosity too. And even if they thought there might be a body in there, they might not be able to resist opening it. But then again, those of us that listen to true crime, we probably expect, okay, there might be a body in here. Maybe some of the people that are out there every day that are not into true crime, maybe they're not thinking the worst, that there's a body in there. Maybe they're thinking there's money in there or something valuable and it's worth looking at. So, I always wonder what they're thinking when they do open those suitcases.
Yeah, I don't know how many people go straight to body. I would think probably more often than not, it's what you just said, which is, ooh, there might be something in here, money, valuables, something like that. But yeah, I mean, hey, curiosity, it gets us, right? It grabs hold of us and sometimes won't let go, to the point where I think you could see that and maybe at first say, oh, I'm not opening that. And then go on and continue doing what you're doing. And then maybe 5-10 minutes later, there's this nagging thought that, man, I got to see what's in that suitcase.
Yeah, well, especially if it's been in the news that other suitcases were found with body parts in it, assuming you saw the news, that second or third person who's already been aware there's bodies being found in suitcases, that would be a warning to me that, hey, this could be a body. I'm not even opening this. I'm calling the police. A medical examiner determined that the man had been shot multiple times in the chest and head. 2 .38 caliber wad cutter bullets were recovered from his body. There were fibers on the bullets that indicated fabric of some kind, like a pillow maybe, had been used as a makeshift silencer. After he was shot to death, he was dismembered, possibly with something like a reciprocating saw, and then he was wrapped in black trash bags, placed into 3 matching suitcases, and then dumped into the water. Though it had been submerged in water and decomposing for days, authorities released a sketch of the man's face to the media, hoping that someone would recognize their John Doe.
And my thought, Morph, is that, the killer had to think that these body parts in these suitcases were going to be thrown into these bodies of water. They were going to sink to the bottom and nobody was going to find them. And obviously we know that's not what happened here. It's also something that I think maybe points to a killer with, little understanding of how something like that might work. I guess what I'm getting at is, do you take that knowledge and think, okay, we're dealing with an amateur here. We're not dealing with a professional hitman or somebody who, has killed a lot of people.
Yeah. What's interesting though, is that all 3 of the suitcases were found. I could see maybe one disappearing, not being found, maybe successfully staying underwater. But in this case, all 3 were found and found pretty quickly within the same time frame. So I think that was a break for investigators. Yeah, I think there's several ways, we've all seen TV shows and movies where people might weigh a bag down or a suitcase down, whatever is containing a body, with chains and blocks, things like that. But this person in this case didn't seem to think about any of that stuff. They just threw the suitcases in the water and hoped for the best.
In mid-May, one of Bill McGuire's friends, Sue Rice, was watching TV when she saw the sketch of the dismembered man appear on the screen, and she immediately thought it was Bill McGuire. Though Bill hadn't been reported missing, his friends had definitely been wondering where he was. Sue contacted the authorities in Virginia to voice her suspicions, and police were able to use fingerprints on file that Bill had from a reckless driving arrest in the 1980s to confirm the identity. There was no doubt the man in the suitcases was Bill McGuire from New Jersey.
Melanie officially filed for divorce on May 25th, claiming that her husband had abandoned her. It was around that time that Virginia investigators showed up at her door to let her know that her husband was dead. When officers notified Melanie, she acted shocked. As far as she knew, her husband had been avoiding her, and she had no idea how he wound up dismembered, with his body parts washing up in another state. She hadn't considered him missing or in danger at all. Melanie claimed that Bill packed 3 suitcases full of his stuff after a huge argument and took off, telling her that it would be up to her to explain his absence in their children's lives.
According to Melanie, the argument started around 3 or 4 in the morning when Bill started saying resentful things to her about their new house. He had wanted to move to the Virginia Beach area, but Melanie wanted to stay in New Jersey. According to Melanie, just hours after closing on the house in New Jersey, the regret of having to compromise became too much for him. But Bill had called 2 friends, one after the other, to tell them how happy he was about closing on the house. These calls occurred at 5:44 and 5:59. This clashed with what Melanie said. These calls also came on the heels of Bill calling the gas company to have gas turned on in their new home. So based on all appearances, Bill was pretty happy and ready to move into this new house.
According to Melanie, the argument turned physical when Bill saw a dryer sheet in the pile of clothes and a laundry basket sitting on the floor, and he became furious. He was against dryer sheets and felt that she was being lazy by using them. He also called Melanie a bad mother for allowing a choking risk, the dryer sheet, to be in reach of their children. According to Melanie, to show her that they were dangerous, he grabbed the dryer sheet, pushed Melanie against the wall, and shoved the dryer sheet into her mouth, trying to stuff it down her throat. Then he slapped her in the face. All of this supposedly happened in front of their 2-year-old son. Melanie said she grabbed the child and ran into a bathroom, barricading herself inside. Through the door, Bill yelled that she would never see him again. According to Melanie, this kind of thing wasn't unusual in their relationship, so she expected that he would return once he had cooled off. Melanie described their relationship, even when they were just dating, as tempestuous, a theme that continued into marriage.
Investigators were not buying Melanie's story, but she stuck to it that Bill had hit her during an argument. She told police to check Atlantic City, where they did end up finding his car. She also hinted that there may be people out there who would have wanted Bill dead. According to ABC News Prime Time, Melanie told investigators that Bill had a knack for pissing people off. Despite Melanie's claims that she had no idea what happened to Bill, police suspected she was lying and that she was responsible for his murder. Things they found in their investigation backed up their belief. First of all, Bill's wallet was found in Melanie's storage unit. Surely this is something that, he would have taken with him if he was leaving her, especially if he was planning to leave the state. And the first thought I had, Morf, was that, I think investigators here, they're in a very difficult situation early on. You have a woman who is claiming to have been abused. And that's something that you have to take extremely serious, right? We know from all the cases that we've done how much domestic violence occurs every day. It's a huge problem, not only in this country, but in other countries as well. But it doesn't take long for them to start not believing her. And I think most of the time that's going to happen when the facts don't kind of quite line up with a person's story. But you have to think that in the beginning, they have to at least start out from the stance of believing her. Number one, she's telling the story. It's a horrible act, but then they start to peel back layers and things are chipping away at her story.
I think investigators really have their work cut out for them. They've got to walk a fine line between, okay, is Melanie a victim who's been abused, or is she simply making this story up? And I think police have to sort of follow where the case takes them, where the evidence takes them, and not be directed by a backstory, whether that's that Melanie's been abused or that Bill's a terrible person, he's abused her. I think they've got to let the details and the clues lead them on their investigation to the truth. Investigators didn't think that Bill's car, a Nissan Maxima, would have fit the 3 suitcases like Melanie had described, especially because when it was recovered from the tow yard in Atlantic City, there were 2 children's car seats in the back seat. They also believe that Bill's killer had used his car to transport his body, the murder weapon, and everything used for the cleanup, because according to the New Jersey Attorney General's office, they discovered tiny bits of Bill's flesh on the floor of the car. These pieces were what you would expect to become stuck in a saw when someone is dismembered. Sulman Din of the Star Ledger described this material as human sawdust.
Boy, and that really paints a vivid, although extremely disturbing, picture. Human sawdust. Now, I can't imagine how someone could dismember a body. My mind has a problem going there, let alone killing them, but then taking that next step of dismembering the body. But I have done, a lot of work around my house. I've used many saws, different types of saws. And I know every time I do some type of project that involves, an electrical saw of some sort, there is sawdust everywhere. So it doesn't surprise me at all that if someone is using a saw, especially some type of powered saw, to dismember a body, that you're kind of going to have that same effect.
It really paints a disturbing picture of what happened to Bill and how gruesome that was. The fact that someone could do this, and, there was that evidence that was left behind. So again, helped investigators see the real story of what happened, and was one more thing that they could use to sort of go down the right path to the conclusion of this case.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can find options that fit your budget and potentially lower your bills. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
Digging into Melanie's life, investigators found that she had been having a 2-year affair with one of the partners at the fertility clinic where she worked as a nurse. Dr. Bradley Miller, the man she was having an affair with, was also married and had young children of his own. Their relationship, which became physical in the office when she was around 38 weeks pregnant with her second child, seemed pretty serious. Bradley Miller tried to talk Melanie out of purchasing the home with Bill because it would be one more obstacle in their future together. But even though the marriage wasn't doing well at the time, Melanie felt that agreeing to the large home purchase was better than letting Bill squander their money in Atlantic City at the casinos. Investigators believe that the primary motive for killing Bill was so that Melanie could be with Bradley, but keep the new house and have full custody of her young boys. But Melanie admitted that even though she was in love with Bradley Miller, neither of them planned to get divorced for the sake of their kids.
Police learned that from the Red Roof Inn in Edison, Melanie had taken Bill's car, the Maxima, to Atlantic City and abandoned it in the parking lot of the Flamingo Motel. As we mentioned, authorities later recovered the car from a tow yard in Atlantic City. Police reported to news outlets that Bill's car had been found and that investigators had recovered the surveillance footage from the Flamingo Motel, showing exactly who left it there. It was at this point that Melanie changed her story for the first time. This was a nice bluff by investigators, because the bright lights in the area created a glare that made it impossible to see who was actually driving the car that night. But their ploy worked. Melanie now claimed that, knowing Bill was in the habit of going to Atlantic City to gamble, she went there on April 29th looking for him. She said that she found his car in the parking lot of the Taj Mahal Casino and decided to move it to the Flamingo Motel about 1.5 miles away to punish him. According to her, this is why the surveillance footage showed her driving Bill's car that night.
Oh, the good old surveillance footage. More, we kind of take it for granted today, right? It's everywhere. I don't know how people are even getting away with crimes today, to be honest with you. I know they are, but it just seems like there is a camera everywhere you go, right? Everybody's got a doorbell camera. They got some kind of outdoor security cameras. But even back then, while not as many people had it personally, you have to believe that these casinos had a lot of security cameras. And you just wonder how she thought she wasn't going to, be seen. Now, the police did an amazing job of kind of bluffing her. They did have video. They just couldn't 100% be sure that it was her because apparently the video wasn't great or there was a glare or whatever it was. But that bluffing, causing someone to change their story, I think that's what really gets people on their heels, right? Because once you change your story to fit the evidence, then it becomes a vicious cycle. You have to change it every time new evidence is introduced that contradicts the stories you've already told.
Yeah, and I think that changing story by Melanie only strengthened the belief by police that she was involved in her husband's murder. So definitely didn't make her look any better in their eyes.
No, because who drives to Atlantic City just to move someone's car from one casino to another in order to, quote unquote, teach them a lesson? So things weren't looking great for Melanie, and police found even more troubling clues. The same month that Bill was murdered, just days before, actually, Melanie had been making some concerning internet searches. According to trial records, she was looking up murder, poisoning, sedatives, and even how to purchase a firearm. She Googled undetectable poisons, instant poison, fatal digoxin doses, instant undetectable poisons, pesticide as poison, insulin as poison, toxic insulin levels, fatal insulin doses, insulin shock, sedatives, tranquilizers, barbiturates, Nimbutal, morphine poisoning, how to find chloroform, neuromuscular blocking agents, chloral hydrate, and chloral and side effects. So, all right, let's just talk a minute about these Google searches. That was a lot, right, to get through, but it's important to name them all to kind of take them in their totality. Now, we all every day do a lot of Google searches or searches on whatever engine you might use. A lot of people use Google, but I don't know how many times around the world on a daily basis, someone would sit down and make those kind of searches, one right after the other. I mean, it does not look good when your husband is later found murdered and dismembered.
Yeah, if your search history looks like that because you're researching a case for an episode of Criminology, that's one thing. But if your spouse or significant other winds up missing and later dead and murdered, well, that's a whole different appearance of those searches being done.
Yeah, you and I talk about our search histories all the time. In a vacuum, if somebody just saw them, okay, they would look a little strange. Not knowing that, we did a true crime podcast and the research that comes along with that. I think just most people in their daily lives, they don't do those kind of searches.
Chloral hydrate is a sedative that was removed from the market nearly a decade after Bill's murder. Investigators believe Bill was drugged before he was shot and dismembered. There was no chloral hydrate found in Bill's system, but that's potentially only because the routine toxicology tests don't look for chloral hydrate. But investigators learned that Melanie forged a prescription for chloral hydrate in the name of one of Dr. Miller's clients at the fertility clinic, using his prescription pad. It was picked up from a Walgreens in Edison near the McGuire Children's Daycare on the morning of April 28th. A vial of chloral hydrate and a syringe were found in the glove box of Bill's car when it was searched by investigators. Since Bill's remains had been cremated, no additional tests could be performed to prove that he had been drugged.
And I found this to be very strange, Morf. There wasn't a ton about it in the research, but you would think that the authorities would not release Bill's remains to be cremated until, everything was kind of buttoned up. It's not like there's a question as to whether this was a murder. I mean, normally when you have a dismembered body, there is a murder that precedes it. Now, not always, but most of the time. There's very little reason for someone to dismember a body if there wasn't a murder.
Yeah, and there's been cases of bodies being held onto by the authorities for long periods of time until they're 100% sure that they can release those remains. And in this case, had they done that and kept Bill's remains there, maybe they could have gone back later on in time and tested for additional poisons and things of that nature. So I'm a little shocked, too, that they let that body go for cremation.
Melanie also looked up the gun laws in New Jersey and in Pennsylvania. Apparently, the waiting period in Pennsylvania was shorter than the requirements in New Jersey, which is a state that has very strict gun laws. It seemed like she also tried to get one of her old friends to lend her a gun. James Finn, who met Melanie in nursing school, had a long-standing crush on her, but she wasn't interested in him. She was so not interested that they didn't really even talk after she graduated from nursing school in 1997. Starting in February, just 2 months before Bill was murdered, Melanie sent emails to James claiming that she was starting to become afraid because Bill had been drinking a lot and acting oddly. She referenced the gun that James owned in that email, but he just advised her on how to start the process of buying one of her own so that she could defend herself if she ever needed to. Just 2 days before Bill was killed, Melanie went to John's Gun and Tackle in Palmer Township, Pennsylvania, and purchased a Taurus .38 caliber revolver. She didn't mention this purchase to James, even though they kept talking after their initial emails about it. She also purchased a box of ammunition. The price on the receipt matched only 2 types, one of which matched the kind of wad cutter bullets that killed Bill. Authorities were never able to find the gun that Melanie purchased.
One of the suitcases with Bill's torso in it also had a blanket inside. The blanket had the initials HCSC on it, which turned out to be a company that provided blankets to hospitals and doctors' offices. The practice where Melanie worked as a nurse was one of the facilities contracted with HCSC and had been for years. Melanie would have had easy access to an identical blanket. Investigators searched her apartment multiple times, but found no evidence that a murder had taken place. No blood, no signs of a hasty or thorough cleanup, no saw marks or bullet holes, no sign of a struggle. There was nothing. And none of their neighbors recalled hearing anything out of the ordinary either. No fight, no gunshots, no power tools. But investigators were sure that Melanie was responsible for Bill's death. They knew that she wanted Bill out of the picture and that she didn't want to lose anything else like money, property, or custody of her children. One of her co-workers, a fellow nurse, told investigators that she and Melanie had been talking about how expensive divorce was, since she had been going through her own separation in the months before Bill went missing.
In May of 2004, Melanie began to move out of the Woodbridge Township apartment she and Bill shared. She gathered up Bill's clothes in trash bags and intended to throw them away. One of the friends who helped her move out of the home decided to keep the bags and later turn them over to authorities. There was a specific manufacturing defect found in the trash bags that Bill's body was recovered in and the trash bag full of Bill's clothes. According to court documents, one forensic scientist who examined the evidence believed that the bags were made on the same manufacturing line in close sequential order, perhaps as close as within 20 bags of one another. So, Morf, I think you'd have to say, right, there are a lot of things lining up here, pointing towards Melanie as killing her husband, Bill. This trash bag thing is very fascinating, that someone could tell that these bags are so similar that they were made not only on the same manufacturing line, but within maybe 20 bags of one another, which would most likely mean they came off the same roll.
Yeah, it's always fascinating to see the lengths that investigators go through to connect dots and just find things that are compelling and seem to stack up against a potential suspect. You know, of course, they have to contact the companies that make these bags and do all that, but it's not an easy process. It's a lot of work.
But it's also something that most people, I would say 99.9% of people, wouldn't think about, right? How is anybody ever going to be able to identify this trash bag? Well, it just so happens that this person who helped you move still has some trash bags that contain some of Bill's clothes. I mean, that's why, for me, it's hard to believe that people get away with the crimes they do. There is so much technology now. There's just so many ways to get tripped up.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can find options that fit your budget and potentially lower your bills. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
Melanie told Dr. Bradley Miller that she went to Delaware on May 4th to buy furniture for the new house. Investigators believe that this is when she dumped the suitcases into the water. The road she would have needed to take to get to Delaware would have also taken her right to the Chesapeake Bay Bridge tunnel, which is where investigators believe the suitcases entered the water. From there, the currents carried the suitcases and their gory contents to where they were eventually found. A year after Bill was killed, investigators were still trying to gather enough evidence of Melanie's involvement in the murder that they felt would seal her fate at trial. And just to give listeners a better sense of what this tunnel is we're talking about, the Chesapeake Bay Bridge tunnel has a portion of bridge that's above the water, but the tunnel itself is a stretch that goes underwater, completely sealed. So it seems like police believe she dumped the suitcases over the part that's not under the water.
James Finn, the nursing school friend that Melanie emailed about guns, agreed to let investigators record his conversations with her. Again, she changed her story. She told James that it had been Bill who wanted to purchase a firearm, but that he had been unable to because he was a convicted felon. She was just trying to fulfill her husband's wishes when she was looking into buying a gun. If you believe Melanie, she had recently purchased a gun for Bill, who had tried to shove a dryer sheet down her throat during an act of domestic violence. She was terrified enough of him that she wanted an order of protection. Still, she tracked him down in Atlantic City and moved his car, which undoubtedly would have provoked him. It's just not the type of behavior you would expect from someone who is afraid and trying to escape an abusive relationship.
Finally, police felt that they had all they needed, and 32-year-old Melanie McGuire was arrested in June 2005 after dropping her children off at school. She took her younger son to daycare and then took her older son to school, where authorities were waiting in the bushes around the building. She was released on bail of $750,000 while she waited for trial. In August, anonymous letters addressed to the New Jersey Attorney General were sent to multiple places, including newspapers and the office of Melanie's former defense attorney. The letter claimed to be from a criminal acquaintance of Bill's who wanted to confess to the murder because Melanie was innocent and the McGuire children shouldn't lose their father and their mother. The letter contained 3 accurate and previously publicly unknown pieces of information about the murder and subsequent dismemberment and disposal of Bill's body. Investigators believe that Melanie, or someone she asked to help her out, had sent the letters because she was the only person who could have known what happened to Bill during and after his murder.
I'll say one thing for her. She's crafty. Now, she may not get all the details right, luckily, right? Because if you get all the details perfectly right, then you get away with murder. And investigators can't put the pieces of the puzzle together. But she never stopped trying. And that's one thing I think you do see from a lot of defendants. It's the reason why, they change their story so much. It's just like, okay, I get it. You're hitting me with this piece of evidence, but I'm going to veer right. And now my story is X. And, even after she's arrested, okay, I'm going to get somebody to, let's say write some letters confessing to the murder. And it's going to have some details in there that the public doesn't know. So they're going to have to take these seriously.
Yeah, she's certainly pulling out all the stops, trying to direct blame from her and make it seem as if she's been framed or the police are going down the wrong path. So, she's definitely skillful, and it seems like she wasn't giving up and just awaiting to be convicted of this.
Well, let's face it, self-preservation is a big thing, right? People don't want to go to jail. They don't want to go to prison. They don't want to lose their freedom. And that's why I think you see, all these desperate attempts by people once they're caught. They're just trying anything they can to kind of wriggle out of the situation they're in. In October of 2005, a grand jury indicted Melanie on charges of first-degree murder, second-degree possession of a weapon for an unlawful purpose, second-degree desecration of human remains, and perjury in the third degree. The perjury charge stemmed from the things she claimed under oath while trying to get the restraining order. Following this indictment, the bail amount was raised to $2.1 million, which she was also able to pay.
That same month, the prosecutor received an anonymous package via FedEx. The sender claimed to have worked at the Weichert Realty office with Bill's sister, Cindy Ligosh. The package contained items that the sender claimed they found in the office's trash can. They were all pretty suspicious. They included a key to Bill's Nissan, an empty box of Ultramax ammunition, the key to a lockbox that was in Melanie's storage unit, Bill's wedding ring and one of his bracelets, rubber gloves, some marijuana wrapped up in foil, and some prescription pills. There were also pieces of paper with handwritten notes, supposedly written by Cindy, that seemed to indicate that she wanted to potentially frame Melanie for Bill's disappearance.
Investigators were able to track the package's origin and find that the sender had used an American Express gift card to pay for the shipping costs at FedEx. They were able to track the purchase of that gift card to a Rite Aid in Passaic, New Jersey. Surveillance footage showed a woman walking into the Rite Aid just 4 minutes before the card was activated in the store, but it wasn't clear enough to definitively identify Melanie as the woman. There was some evidence that the sender did not work at Weichert Realty. The return address on the package was slightly wrong, listing Franklin Road instead of Franklin Avenue. The company's telephone number on a letter written on what looked like company letterhead was wrong too. The logo wasn't even their actual logo, and the company didn't use FedEx to send their packages. Investigators believe that Melanie or someone acting on her behalf sent that package just like the letters. In October of 2006, a second grand jury returned a second indictment, this time on 8 charges for the actions Melanie took to try to cover up the crime and misdirect the investigation, including allegedly sending that anonymous package to the prosecutor. An additional $10,000 bail was required thanks to these new charges. Again, Melanie had no trouble paying for her freedom.
The jury wasn't able to hear her full story, but Bill's ex-wife, Marcy Polk, was willing to testify for the defense. They were married for 8 years. She was ready to claim that in 1992, Bill had simply abandoned their marriage, leaving her, but continuing to use her credit cards until she was completely broke. She had also once filed for a restraining order against Bill in 1995, the year after they separated, because he broke her window with a rock. Marcy told the New York Times, "I was a wreck by the time I got out of that marriage. He emotionally and physically abused me." She also said he gambled constantly. And according to Melanie, Marcy had a warning for her. Melanie told ABC News Primetime that Marcy said to her, "He's going to make you think you're crazy. This is what he's done to me. He's going to do it to you."
George Lowry, who had worked with Bill in 2003, backed up Melanie's claims about the gun. He said that Bill wanted to buy a gun for protection because there had been so many recent car break-ins in the area, but that a conviction kept him from being able to get the required permit. At trial, the defense had an answer for the chloral hydrate vial found in Bill's car. The claim was that Bill was using steroids and needed the sedative to counteract some side effects. As for those Google searches, they also argued that it was Bill who was using the computer at the time. After all, the vial was found in his car, so it would make sense for him to have searched for it. And according to court documents, along with all those searches about poison, there was a search for, quote, how to commit suicide. And my thought is more of, the defense, they obviously had an uphill battle. They had a lot of things that they had to try to combat. There was quite a bit of evidence, right, that had mounted up against Melanie. So that, they were able to find a few people to back up some of the things that she had said, right? Bill's ex-wife said that he was abusive towards her. This coworker of Bill's said that he did want to buy a gun, but he couldn't because of a prior conviction. Some of those things, did back up her story. They even tried to blame the Google searches on Bill, saying that he used the chloral hydrate to counteract steroid side effects. But here's the thing, right? Some of those things could be true, right? Bill could have been abusive to his former wife. He also could have been abusive to Melanie. He could have wanted to buy a gun, but wasn't able to. But to me, those are not things that really counteract the mountain of evidence that they had against Melanie. I mean, they don't hurt her. They do kind of help her a little bit in trying to corroborate some of, the things that she had said, but they're not the types of things that I think would in any way outweigh all this evidence against her.
I think two things can be right at the same time. I think two things can be true. Bill could have abused Melanie and he could have tried to get that gun, but wasn't able to. And even if those things are true, it could still be true that Melanie murdered him and chopped him up and put him in those suitcases. So I think we have to be careful too, not to go, buy in on one thing, dismissing the other things that we're thinking about at the same time.
Yeah, because by my way of thinking, if you are going to tell a story, it's much better to have some basis in fact for parts of that story, right? She decides to buy a gun and then she knows, let's say, if this is true, that Bill at one point wanted to buy one, but he couldn't, so she can weave that into her story.
On April 23rd, after 7 weeks of trial, Melanie McGuire was found guilty of the murder of her husband, William McGuire, as well as perjury, possession of a firearm for an unlawful purpose, and the desecration of remains. The jury returned a not guilty verdict on charges of tampering, possession of Xanax without a prescription, and 2 charges of hindering apprehension. At trial, the defense tried to paint a picture of Bill as a gambling addict with a hot temper who stormed out on his wife and children, went to Atlantic City angry, and got himself into trouble. The jury was supposed to think about the mafia and what they did to people who couldn't pay their debts, but they didn't buy that.
After Melanie was convicted, the defense filed a motion for a new trial because a man named Christopher Thiem came forward with new but untrue information. At the time, he was toward the beginning of serving 7 years in prison for attacking a young woman with a pool cue at his apartment. He tried to claim that he kept the books for a high-ranking mob member and that he knew Bill. Thiem said that shortly before his murder, Bill visited the man he worked for and asked for a large loan. He was already nearly $100,000 in debt. After numerous issues with Thiem's credibility were pointed out, the defense withdrew this motion for a new trial, and they didn't end up using him as a witness. He recanted his story. In 2016, he was charged with trying to hire a hitman to kidnap and kill a woman who he met on a dating site. They had gone on 2 dates when he decided he wanted to pay someone $25,000 to help him harm her. He planned to hold her for weeks and use her own bank account and assets to pay for the kidnapping.
3 months after Melanie's conviction, Superior Court Judge Frederick DeVessa handed down a sentence of life in prison. New Jersey Attorney General Stuart Radner told the press, "Melanie McGuire went to extraordinary lengths to cover up her crime. I'm pleased to say that the state also went to great lengths to expose and convict her. It was also noted that Melanie very obviously planned the crime for weeks, if not months, before she actually killed Bill. There were many chances for her to change her mind and simply divorce him. Not only did she kill him, she cut up his body and dumped it into the water, hoping no one would ever find it, and everyone who loved him would be left to wonder what happened to him."
Due to the No Early Release Act, Melanie McGuire is not eligible for parole until she has served 63 years and 9 months behind bars. She would be over 100 years old by then. There is still a question of exactly how Melanie did all of this without leaving any traces of blood in her apartment, and also how she made it to Atlantic City with Bill's car and then got back home without it. There were no records of a taxi from Atlantic City to Woodbridge Township that night. In addition, Bill was 6'3" tall and weighed over 200 pounds. So if she did this all on her own, it would be difficult. If she had any help, it's not known who may have assisted her. This has, of course, caused speculation that Melanie had an accomplice. Dr. Bradley Miller had a solid alibi for the relevant periods of time, including seeing patients, which would be pretty hard to fake. Dr. Miller also voluntarily allowed authorities to record his phone calls with Melanie, even as he continued his relationship with her.
An attempt by Melanie and her legal team to appeal her conviction was unanimously denied in 2011. In 2014, she requested a review of newly discovered evidence and tried to argue that her counsel at trial was ineffective. Daniel Bornstein, an assistant state attorney general, said, "Ms. McGuire wasn't convicted because of an ineffective assistance on behalf of her trial attorneys. She was convicted because there's overwhelming evidence of her guilt." This motion for post-conviction relief was also denied. Melanie McGuire is still serving her time at Edna Mann Correctional Facility in Clinton, the only women's prison in the state of New Jersey. In 2020, a Justice Department report exposed decades of sexual and physical abuse taking place at this facility. It had been going on for so long, since at least 1994, as covered in the report. It was so egregious that Governor Phil Murphy felt that the only option was to close the facility. He announced his decision to do that in 2021.
The correctional facility is still currently open, but in October of 2025, crews broke ground in Chesterfield, New Jersey, where all female inmates will eventually be housed. The facility will also have better options for treatment and rehabilitation, and families will also be able to travel for visits much more easily. According to NJ.com News, they're calling it a purpose-built correctional facility that will enable the incarcerated women to grow personally and build dignity and diligence in themselves in preparation for when they return to their communities. Construction is expected to finish in 2028. So it sounds more of like it might be a nice facility. It might have some more programs. What I can tell you is that Melanie McGuire is not going to benefit from any of those programs because I don't believe she is ever getting out of prison. She is going to die there.
Yeah, I think this programs are geared towards prisoners that can be rehabilitated and re-enter their communities. But it's clear from everything we know about Melanie and her conviction that she's not a candidate to ever be out on the street again. Melanie McGuire won't be eligible for parole anytime soon and continues to maintain her innocence. And while most people believe she's right where she belongs, there are some people that support her. She's in prison. Her husband, Bill, died in a hideous way, and their children are now left without parents in their lives. So this is a tragic story all the way around.
Yeah, as so many stories are, right? As we wrap this one up, this is another story where there's no winners. Everybody loses. But to me, a lot of it comes down to, what was it all for? What was the motive behind the murder? Well, Melanie would say that, she was being abused and all of this, but it seems clear from what investigators found that this was purely a financial and custody situation, as many murders are. Now, a lot of them are perpetrated by husbands. We've covered those, but women commit those types of murders as well. I still don't understand it, and I just never will. So many people get divorced because they can't get along. They don't want to be together anymore. But then you have this population of people who, in their mind, make the decision that they would rather end their partner's life than have to be out some money, right? Pay alimony, pay child support, give up the house and split it, or whatever the terms of the arrangement would be. That just blows my mind.
Yeah, I think that's what makes these cases so interesting, because it's hard to understand, why people go this route instead of simply divorcing and resetting their lives and starting over. It doesn't make sense to risk going to the prison for the rest of your life when you can just simply get divorced. But I think that's why sometimes we're drawn to these cases, because we can't put ourselves in that way of thinking.
And, the other thing that stood out to me about this case was, I do think that Melanie McGuire, she planned this for some period of time. Authorities said it, right? They don't know if it was weeks or months, but there was some planning. Just go back to all the different Google searches. But there's this thing to me where, some of these people, they think they're smarter than what they are. It's really hard to plan the perfect crime.
Yeah, we also talked at length about what she did after the fact, trying to send packages and letters and things to try and shift the blame in a different direction. So, premeditation and then post-meditation, she was still trying to steer this case in a direction after the fact. And I think of, you talked about the Google searches, the pre-planning, the premeditation. It'd be one thing if Bill was abusive and was attacking her and she killed him in self-defense and then panicked and then tried to cover it up. That would be a whole different set of circumstances, I think. But the time over time, the Google searches, those things make it troubling and show that she was planning this for some period of time. And this wasn't like a spur of the moment self-defense type of thing.
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt about that. And then you throw in the affair and all of that. It's just, I get it. People fall out of love with each other. They don't want to be together anymore. There are ways to end relationships. There's a bunch of different ways to do it without resorting to killing your significant other. But it probably shouldn't shock me at this point, but it still does. That so many people choose that route. They can say to themselves, yes, this is the route I should take, and they do it. I'll never understand it. I really won't. So that's it for our episode on Melanie McGuire and the Suitcase Murder. As always, if you love the show, but haven't done so yet, just take a minute. Go out, leave us a review, a rating. Also, keep telling your friends. Word of mouth about Criminology really helps us out.
If you want to find us on social media, we're on every major platform. Just search Criminology Podcast on your favorites. If you want to find news about the show, past episodes, and more, head over to our website, criminologypodcast.com. And if you want to join a discussion about the show and the cases we cover, head over to Facebook and check out the Criminology Podcast discussion and fans group.
So that's it for another episode of Criminology, but Morf and I will be back with all of you next Saturday night with a brand new episode. So until then, for Mike
and Morf,
we'll talk to you next week.
Take care, everyone.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can find options that fit your budget and potentially lower your bills. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
Marketing is hard. But I'll tell you a little secret. It doesn't have to be. Let me point something out. You're listening to a podcast right now, and it's great. You love the host. You seek it out and download it. You listen to it while driving, working out, cooking, even going to the bathroom. Podcasts are a pretty close companion. And this is a podcast ad. Did I get your attention? You can reach great listeners like yourself with podcast advertising from Libsyn Ads. Choose from hundreds of top podcasts offering host endorsements, or run a pre-produced ad like this one across thousands of shows to reach your target audience in their favorite podcasts with Libsyn Ads. Go to libsynads.com, that's Libsyn, ads.com today.